You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and we have 3 stories today, all of them with some sort of resolution, which doesn't always happen with our stories. First, we have the funny and also empathetic trial of Afroman. Then we'll take a look at a missing toddler case out of Alabama. And finally, a cold case potentially solved in Iowa. So let's get after it. Our first story today has the internet divided, and to be honest, I get it. Because at times I was kind of laughing out loud, and then at other times I felt really bad for law enforcement. Although they did kind of bring it on themselves, just kind of. So to understand it all, we need to have some backstory, and it starts with a really funny and clever dude. Afroman is the stage name of Joseph Edgar Foreman. He was born July 28th of 1974 in Los Angeles, California. And you guys, if you're doing the math, he's now 51 years old. He spent part of his early childhood in Mississippi before the family settled in South Central Los Angeles, and then later in Palmdale, California. Now, music was in his blood from the start. He played the drums and guitar at church as a kid, and by age 13, he was already kind of writing his own lyrics. He was making beats at home, and he was selling homemade mixtapes to classmates. Well, in high school, he even wrote and sold a rap that was dissing one of his teachers. He actually sold over 400 copies to friends and others at school. Now, he eventually dropped out of Palmdale High School in 1991, and then he hustled in the streets while chasing a music career. His first independent album, called My Frolosophy, that happened in 1998, it didn't really go anywhere. But the follow-up album, titled Sell Your Dope, that one happened in 1999, it got a lot of local buzz in Mississippi, where he'd moved to, that being Hattiesburg area. Well, everything changed in 2000 and 2001 with the song Because I Got High. Now, this is a hilarious self-deprecating stoner anthem. It's kind of about how weed derailed his life. Maybe you might remember it. It goes, I was gonna clean my room until I got high. That one. Look, I'm no good at it, so I'm gonna have my editor play a portion of it for you. La, 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 la. La, 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 la. La, 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 la.
Yeah. I was gonna clean my room until I got high. I was gonna get up and find the broom, but then I got high. My room is still messed up, and I know why. Why, man? Yeah, cause I got high. Because I got high. Because I got high.
Well, now that track blew up on Napster, and it got heavy rotation on Howard Stern's show. It was also featured in the movie Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. It hit the Billboard charts after all of that, and it went platinum, and it finally earned him a Grammy nomination in 2002 for Best Rap Solo Performance. It also landed him a deal with Universal Records. Now, his major label debut album, titled The Good Times, well, it followed all of that success, and that album did sell relatively well. After a few years with the label, Afroman went fully independent, and that's something he's proud of to this day. He's released dozens of albums since, including the double disc Afroholic, The Better Times, that was in 2004, and he also kept touring and built a loyal fan base with his really comedic, laid-back, guitar-laced, kind of humorous rap style, obviously full of weed jokes. There's also satire and some real talk storytelling. He could have been the ultimate example of a one-hit wonder, but instead, he turned his quirky style into a long career on his own terms. Now, this is a crime podcast, so I think the obvious thing you might think about a guy who sings about getting high is that he got in trouble criminally. Maybe he broke the law with drugs or drove drunk or had a party go too wild. Well, no, not with this crime story. Afroman wasn't in criminal court. He found himself being sued by the police department in Adams County, Ohio. So how'd we end up there? Well, the event that kicked off this unusual string of police mishaps happened in August of 2022 in, like I said, Adams County. This isn't Hollywood or like a crowded Miami Beach home. Adams County is a place where homes kind of sit back off the street and neighbors are a little more spread out. It's just a quiet lifestyle for someone with the notoriety of Afroman. On that Sunday, law enforcement shattered the peace and quiet when sheriff's deputies arrived at the home of Afroman. They weren't there for a knock and talk. They were armed with a search warrant, and they were taking themselves pretty seriously. See, it wasn't just a cruiser with 2 deputies. Reports say it was a small convoy of law enforcement that were there searching for evidence attached to 2 serious assumptions. Law enforcement believed Afroman was involved in suspected drug trafficking and also that he was connected to an alleged kidnapping. So yeah, they were taking themselves seriously in this search of Afroman's property. But the reality inside the home wasn't what deputies expected. First off, Afroman wasn't there. He was in Chicago. And inside the home, they found Afroman's wife, other members of his family, and a couple of friends, all of which had absolutely nothing to do with the 2 suspected crimes of drugs and kidnapping. When deputies approached the door, they allegedly didn't knock. They didn't announce why they were there. Abruptly, they instead forced open the door, causing damage. They damaged the external gate to the property, and they then broke portions of the security system. In essence, the damages cost an estimated of $20,000 to repair. Now, the whole event was kind of loud, it was physical, and it was disruptive. And for the people inside the home who were innocent of these crimes that police were looking for evidence of, it was pretty terrifying. What the deputies didn't anticipate was that Afroman had far more surveillance cameras than they thought. And those cameras were rolling throughout the search. That footage showed officers moving throughout the house, opening doors, rifling through suit jackets, searching rooms, emptying the fridge, like moving everything around. They were handling personal belongings, even thoroughly examining a lemon pound cake that was on the table. And all of it was stored for later viewing and, unfortunately, later mockery. Deputies did conduct a full sweep of the property looking for drugs and evidence that those drugs were being trafficked. They also were looking for some sort of kidnapping victim, but they came up nearly empty-handed. Officers did seize about $5,000 in cash, and that's about it. There wasn't much else. In fact, the search was so fruitless that no charges, 0 charges were filed against Afroman. When the money, that $5,000, was returned to Afroman, he alleged about $400 was missing. And he also said the family and friends were left a little traumatized. Now, you guys, can the cops enter the home and search with a warrant? Sure, yeah, they had a warrant. But they also couldn't prevent the recording from happening. True to who Afroman is and was, he let comedy and music tell the story. In December of 2022, he released the song and official video titled, "Will You Help Me Repair My Door?" He used the actual security footage of the deputies smashing his door and searching his house. Here, I'll play a portion for you.
Will you help me repair my gate? Will you help me repair my door? Did you find what you was looking for? Will you help me repair my gate and door? Would you like a slice of lemon pound cake? You can take as much as you wanna take. There must be a big mistake. Would you like to have a slice of my lemon pound cake?
Now, for those on podcast only, of course you heard how the lyrics mock the raid. You know, it's saying things like, did you find what you were looking for? But what you didn't see was deputies with their guns drawn. Deputies ripping the exterior door to the house from its hinges. You guys, this isn't a drug house. It's clean. It's cared for. And there are even little kid drawings on the wall near the door that gets ripped from its hinges. Well, that song went viral. I only looked for the song in one place, and the version that I watched had nearly 10 million views on YouTube and over 36,000 comments. All right, with that kind of success, Afroman just kept the creative juices flowing. He next released an even bigger hit, Lemon Pound Cake. The title comes from footage of a deputy hungrily staring at the lemon pound cake on the kitchen counter while searching the house with his gun drawn. Now, the video intercuts the raid clips with Afroman rapping lines like, "You crooked cops need to stop it. There are no kidnapping victims in my suit pockets." He also used the security camera footage to literally show what happened. Deputies rummaging through his stuff, pointing guns, using excessive force, and all that came with it. Now, he's said repeatedly in interviews since that making the songs was his way of turning the deputies' quote, mistake into something positive. And it was also his way of exercising his free speech. Now, do the music videos mock the officers? Oh, you bet. The whole mockery does make the officers look kind of incompetent and bumbling. Now, we could stop the story here and it would be viral and funny and a true concept of turning lemon pound cake into lemonade. But it goes even more off the rails with the Adams County Sheriff's Office because law enforcement, they weren't laughing. In fact, they were furious. And in March of 2023, so just, a few weeks after the songs went viral, 7 deputies filed a civil lawsuit against Afroman. They were asking for about $4 million in damages. They claimed defamation, invasion of privacy, and that Afroman used their likenesses without permission in the videos and on social media. They said the videos caused them embarrassment, death threats, mental distress, and harassment. Now, as is true with civil cases, it took years for the case to finally reach a courtroom, but it finally did last week. And Afroman took his free speech rights, and to be honest, his free apparel rights, well, he took it seriously. Afroman showed up in court wearing a red, white, and blue American flag suit. The trial began with the music videos being played, which, to be honest, had to be painful for those deputies. This was the mockery on full display, and whether you think they deserved it or not, that was probably the emotion they were feeling, a little bit of embarrassment and probably ridicule. When one of the deputies testified, she told jurors that she felt humiliated by the music videos and when they were released and viewed by millions. She testified that their reputation in the community changed. And then when a video was played again for questioning of the deputy became emotional, even tearing up on the stand. When the defense had their turn, they didn't deny that the videos existed. Clearly, they exist. They also didn't deny the tone of the videos. They didn't even deny that the deputies were the butt of the jokes. The defense leaned into it. They told the jurors the criticism was pointed, intentional, and critical. But they said that doesn't make it illegal. The defense attorney argued that under the law, especially when it comes to public officials, criticism, even when it is harsh or embarrassing, is actually protected. And that is really what is at play here. The deputies needed to prove that the videos were made with malice and that they were false. That's a really high bar because satire of actual video is protected. Now, it might be uncomfortable and yes, possibly damaging to reputations, but that doesn't make it worthy of a potential award of nearly $4 million. And so, Afroman boldly and unapologetically took the stand. He testified that he was just rapping about what actually happened to him and his family, that the raid was a mistake on their part, and that the videos were protected free speech. He pointed out he never would have known their names or made the songs if they hadn't raided his house. He framed the songs as a response, not an attack. And the deputy's attorneys, well, they rebutted that claim, saying Afroman's wide exposure made the criticism land differently and especially more harmfully. Afroman's defense basically said if an everyday citizen can't criticize the behavior of authority, especially when the criticism was just factual video, then the authority will always have too much power. Well, after a couple of days of testimony, the jury deliberated for about 6 hours, and Afroman won on every accusation. It seems like it was about 13 counts. The judge read the following, quote, "In all circumstances, the jury finds in favor of the defendant. No plaintiff verdict prevailed." Now, Afroman celebrated this victory. Of course he did. But back in February, his countersuit against the deputies was dismissed, and he didn't celebrate that dismissal. He said the following, "I don't like that they dismissed all of my claims with a click of a button in some little office somewhere without a hearing." Now, his dismissal means he is responsible for the repairs to the house and the security system. Okay, I don't always offer my opinion on the stories. I bring them to you and I ask you to respond. But in this case, I think the jury got this spot on, 100% correct. If we get to a place where you can't use footage from your own surveillance cameras to prove your point, whether it be in the court of public opinion or in an actual courthouse, we've lost the thread. You might feel differently though. Let me know in the comments what you think of this case. All right, you guys, our second story just crushes me. Not only does it involve a child who can't protect herself, but it also involves gaps in the community and surrounding acquaintances. The child was just forgotten. A 2-year-old who had no one speak up for her. And like I said, that's crushing. In the early morning hours of February 16th of this year in Enterprise, Alabama, a call came in that would immediately trigger fear throughout a community. A mother reported that her 2-year-old daughter, Genesis Reed, was missing from their home. According to that initial account by the mom, the child had disappeared sometime during the night, and the door to the home had been left open. For anyone in the community hearing that story in real time, the implications were probably immediate and terrifying. A toddler is alone somewhere in the dark with no clear indication of where she might have gone or if someone has taken her. Officers began gathering information. They were trying to establish when Genesis had last been seen and who had been in the home and whether there were any immediate signs of forced entry or abduction. Now, in those first hours, the case had all the urgency and emotional weight of a missing child investigation, the kind that mobilizes not just police, but the entire community. But as investigators started doing what investigators do, they were speaking with neighbors, they were checking the kind of questionable timelines and asking basic but critical questions. Well, the foundation of that initial story began to shift. People in the area told police that they had not seen Genesis recently. And as those conversations continued, the time frame grew longer and longer. It was not just a day or two where Genesis hadn't been seen. Some individuals indicated they had not seen Genesis in weeks. And some of these interviews were pointing back as far as Christmas for the last sighting of Genesis. You guys, this was the middle of February, and people can't remember seeing her since before Christmas. Again, this is crushing. Now, that kind of information changes the trajectory of a case almost immediately because it forces investigators to reconsider everything they thought they knew. If a child has not been seen in weeks, then the question is no longer about what happened overnight. It becomes a question about what has been happening over a much longer period of time and why no one outside the home was aware that something was wrong. As detectives continued to interview people and compare statements, they began to identify inconsistencies in the account provided by Genesis' mother. Her name is Adrienne Reed. Now, the timeline Adrienne described, it wasn't aligning with what others were saying, and the details did not remain consistent when she was pushed. Based on those discrepancies, law enforcement made the decision to detain her, and then she was later charged with false reporting. Basically, they're going to keep her because they've got a lot of investigation to do. And that investigation had shifted. The boogeyman had not entered the home in the middle of the night and taken Genesis. It was more likely that Adrienne, or someone closely connected with Adrienne, knew what really happened to Genesis. As the investigation expanded, additional agencies became involved. They used some federal partners, and law enforcement began following leads that extended beyond the immediate neighborhood. They also have said they identified a person of interest. This is a woman known as Mariah, and investigators are saying they believed she might have information relevant to the case. But that's all the details they're explaining. They're not saying what her role was and if she had anything directly connected to the disappearance of Genesis. They're going to wait and hold on to that information. Now, as Adrienne has been held, search efforts were continuing during this time, including the use of a cadaver dog at the home, but that search did not produce evidence indicating that Genesis had potentially died there. And rather than closing off possibilities, that absence of evidence appeared to reinforce the idea that whatever had happened to her had possibly taken place elsewhere and that her body had been moved. Now, the small community was still hoping that Genesis would be found. Of course they are. And they're maybe thinking that her mother had left her with someone and that person could be tracked down. Maybe Genesis could be found that way. But then there were others in the community that were fearing the worst. And I remember here in Idaho when Lori Daybell was saying her children were with someone, many of us actually clung to that kind of hope that it was true, possibly, that those kids were somewhere else. We didn't want to believe that a mother could kill her own kids. Now, we all know how that turned out, and Lori is now spending life in prison. But I get it when the community is hoping for more. But just like in Lori's case, the narrative fell apart because on March 9th of this year, which would have been Genesis Reed's 3rd birthday, that makes this all that much more tragic. On March 9th, law enforcement provided an update that brought a devastating level of finality to the case. Enterprise Police Chief Michael Moore announced that Adrienne Reed had been charged with capital murder and abuse of a corpse. According to investigators, the evidence they had gathered led them to believe that Genesis had been killed on Christmas Day, nearly 2 months before she was reported missing. Authorities further stated that they had obtained video evidence showing Adrienne Reed placing Genesis' remains in a duffel bag and discarding it in a dumpster near her apartment complex. Now, that's all they gave, and that's what law enforcement is saying. There is no video out there. It hasn't been shown, but that's what they're indicating. Now, from there, the investigation shifted toward recovery efforts, with law enforcement focusing on a landfill in Coffee County, where they believed Genesis's remains may have been transported. Grid searches are still being conducted at the time of this recording, but the remains of Genesis have not been recovered, despite investigators believing they have narrowed down the search area where the remains from the dumpster would have been placed. There is a fear that the remains have been compacted due to the trash collection process. You guys remember, she is just 2 years old and she's fairly tiny. I'll keep watching this case in hopes that I can let you know that they have found that sweet little girl and she can finally receive the respect she deserves, even if it is just the careful and respectful handling of her remains. Now finally to a missing persons case that's been cold for 15 years. And it might have been solved as of St. Patrick's Day. Ashley Auckland was 27 years old, living in central Iowa and building a life that was very much considered successful. She had graduated from Iowa State University and had found her stride in real estate. This was a career that really fit her personality because Ashley was a people person. She was described as warm and inclusive and optimistic. She was said to be someone who made people feel comfortable almost instantly. She's that kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with connections. And if you think about it, that's exactly what real estate demands. You're constantly meeting new people, you're welcoming them into spaces, and you're making that, soft, tender small talk, building trust in a matter of minutes. And Ashley was really good at it. She was also someone who showed up in her community. She volunteered, she mentored, and she was involved all over the place. Okay, there's this consistent thread when people talk about her that she was kind and open and genuinely cared about others, and she's beautiful. You guys, Ashley was middle America. She grew up in central Iowa where she was involved in sports and dance and 4-H, because can you get any more Midwest wholesome than 4-H? She graduated from Iowa State University, like I said, and by her mid-20s, she was making her way in the real estate world and making connections. All of that wholesomeness, all that openness is what makes what happened next feel so especially cruel. It was April 8th of 2011, a Friday afternoon in West Des Moines, just before 2 p.m. Now, Ashley was working inside a model townhouse on Stone Creek Court, and this wasn't unusual for her. She was showing properties like a model home, and it was a normal part of her job. And I don't know if you've ever been to one of these model homes, but it's kind of like an open door policy. There's a very neutral decor type house, and Ashley would be showing people around that. Her hopes is to close a sale on the build of another home. So it's a place where pretty much anyone can walk in, and it's designed to help them imagine their future. Well, Ashley was there, welcoming people in. And at some point that afternoon, someone came through that door. As of right now, we still don't know exactly what was said. We don't know how long the interaction lasted. But what investigators were able to determine back in 2011 is that whatever happened, it happened quickly. Because nearby, a construction worker heard something that didn't sound correct. It was a disturbance with loud noises, and something was out of place in what should have been a quiet workday for Ashley. Well, when that construction worker went to investigate inside that townhouse, that model home, he found Ashley on the floor. She had been shot twice. And although the construction worker acted quickly, calling 911, and also by responding to the loud noises, it wasn't enough because Ashley died from her wounds. One of the most haunting observations in this case came a few weeks later from Ashley's mother. She said that her daughter likely looked up, smiled at whomever walked through the door, and never had a reason to believe she was in danger. Imagining your daughter like this, that had to be pretty difficult because that image captures both who Ashley was and also the vulnerability that came with her job. She was just doing exactly what her job required of her, exactly what she had done countless times before, and that normalcy is what makes the violence feel so jarring for her family. Well, from the very beginning, investigators were faced with a case that did not follow a clear path because you don't have a sign of a forced entry. Obviously, it's not entirely surprising given that Ashley was working in a setting where people were just expected to come and go. And there was no indication that anything had been stolen, so it didn't look like a robbery of any kind. There was no struggle that had escalated out of control. There was just Ashley on the floor with 2 gunshot wounds. So what they were left with instead was a scene that suggested, something more deliberate, something that did not easily fit into a familiar category. And as the investigation moved forward, detectives worked the case extensively. They followed hundreds of leads, ultimately logging close to 900 tips, and they interviewed approximately 500 individuals in an effort to identify anyone who may have seen something unusual that day. There were even search warrants that were executed, and information was cross-referenced, and it seemed like every possible avenue was explored, though those details have kind of been kept tight and close to the vest, but nothing was really standing out for them. Now, among the pieces of information that did surface that we have heard about was this repeated idea of the presence of a black SUV, possibly a Cadillac Escalade. Some witnesses were saying that SUV was seen in the area around the time of the shooting. Now, while that specific detail was noted and told to the public, it really didn't provide the kind of specificity needed to move the case forward, because in a residential area, during the middle of the day, a vehicle like that does not really distinguish itself. And without any additional identifying information, like maybe a dented fender or a specific, tint on the windows, or maybe, something like a vanity plate, a black SUV is just not going to be able to provide that much detail for investigators. Now, another thing that was a problem here, motive was an issue, because why Ashley? I just spent the first part of the story telling you how awesome she was, because back in 2011, Ashley didn't seem to have any enemies. And although investigators didn't really tell why they thought it was a targeted attack, they weren't informing the family and friends what was going on. They couldn't really understand who would do this to Ashley. They think it's targeted, but really it stops there because she doesn't have anybody who would harm her. Now, investigators did look in other places. They explored the possibility of similar crimes occurring elsewhere. See, in 2014, so a few years later, a real estate agent named Beverly Carter was murdered in Arkansas. This under circumstances that initially appeared comparable. Her killer was eventually identified and admitted that he had specifically targeted women who work alone, which understandably raised concerns about whether Ashley's case could have been connected to that case. However, after examining the details and timelines, authorities were unable to establish any kind of a link between the two cases, so that left Ashley's murder standing on its own without a clear parallel to anything else they could find. At that point, they could only continue to watch for repeat cases. Maybe another one would crop up in a year or two. And then the case cooled. Some would say it went completely cold. But hope was renewed in mid-2024, so many years later. This was when Iowa Attorney General Brenna Bird, she launched the state's dedicated cold case unit on June 18th. Now, Brenna Bird, who was a former prosecutor, she made it a day one priority once she won that seat. The unit got funded for 3 full-time investigators and 1 prosecutor just to tackle Iowa's backlog of over 400 unsolved homicides. And their mission was to bring fresh eyes and new technology and relentless focus to old cases. They partnered with local PDs because this is a statewide group. So, of course, they got to go to the local PDs. They're the ones with all of the information. They also decided to work with the DCI, that's the Division of Criminal Investigation there in Iowa. And then they did use some of the FBI behavioral analysis to work on some of the cases. And the Ashley Auckland case, well, it quickly became a front runner for them, one that they felt like they needed to look into. So the team collaborated closely with West Des Moines detectives in what would become the final push in this case, because that collaboration bore fruit. After reviewing old evidence and chasing lingering leads, and then possibly using grand jury tools to question witnesses under oath, investigators built enough probable cause for action. A Dallas County grand jury heard the evidence and issued a potential answer. They returned with an indictment charging 53-year-old Kristen Elizabeth Ramsey with first-degree murder. Okay, for us, that went from 0 to 60 real quick. We haven't been on this case this long, and that was less than 2 years for them to go from a completely cold case to a grand jury indictment. I'm sure that's not the way the family felt. It was much longer for them. But wow, good work by that case group. And on Tuesday, March 17th, West Des Moines detectives arrested Kristen Ramsey without incident at her home in Woodward, Iowa. She was booked into Dallas County Jail on a $2 million cash-only bond. Now, Ramsey had worked as an administrative assistant and sales manager for Rotland Homes. That's the exact developer of the model townhome where Ashley was killed. Remember back in 2011, she was trying to sell those townhomes that would be built by people who come in and imagine their dream. Well, Kristen worked for the same group. And this arrest was shocking to some of those who knew Ashley and Kristen. Kristen's former boss described her as the, quote, nicest lady. And then he said he was, quote, totally shocked by the news. He said he even sat next to Kristen at Ashley's funeral. Well, the arrest gets a little bit more bizarre when you realize that Kristen has no criminal record, 0 criminal record. She has 1 minor traffic ticket from years ago. Now, as of recording of this podcast, the authorities are keeping everything kind of under wraps. They didn't mention a black SUV in the arrest, but it does have me wondering if Kristen drove one. Now, I'm sure more will be released as the pretrial hearings occur. Josh Auckland and Brittany Bruce, those are Ashley's younger siblings, a brother and a sister. Well, they thanked the authorities and the community for their support in the years leading up to Kristen Ramsey's arrest. Brittany told reporters that it was difficult to see the case go cold so long ago. And on the legal side, Kristen's attorneys argued that the $2 million bond was excessive and unconstitutional. They were citing that she lacks financial resources to post the bond and that her lack of criminal history and also her current steady employment and strong family ties, like a husband and a son who's attending college, well, they're saying that should make her eligible for a reduced amount. The judge is taking the reduction under consideration. So I'll keep watching this one. Like I said, I recorded early, so I'll keep you updated on Thursday's episode. All right, you guys, that's it for today. That's your Monday episode of Rise in Crime. Are you guys doing March Madness? So like I said, I mentioned a couple times in the podcast that I recorded early. When I recorded on Friday, I was currently leading my office pool. Not just leading, I submitted 4 brackets, and all 4 of my brackets are number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. I don't even know how that happens. I play March Madness every year, and I don't even know what happens. And you guys, this story gets crazier because one of my brackets I picked solely off of mascots that I like. I was like, I'm going to have fun. Look, I'll tell you exactly what I did. I used Grok, the AI Grok service, to pick one of them. I just wanted to see how good an AI would do at it. So one of my brackets is Grok, and that's the brackets that's in the 4th place. Then 2 of my brackets, so number 2 and number 3, the in place number 2 and number 3, those were ones that I researched and they were a little bit different. I had a few more upsets on one than the other. So they're doing really well because I did pick a couple of the upsets that happened. And then my 1st place bracket is my mascot only bracket. I picked solely off of mascots and it is the 1st place bracket. Don't even tell me how that's possible. It's crazy. So I'll keep you updated because March Madness goes for about 3 weeks and it's so fun. One year I went for my birthday. It was just such a blast. So I'll let you know if I eventually end up winning the office pool. But as of right now, I've got the top 4 spots. I really feel like I should go buy a lottery ticket or something. All right, you guys, please share this episode with a friend. I had so much fun researching the Afroman case. It was a fun one to learn about that guy. He seems like a blast. And then the little story about Genesis, that was a case suggestion by one of our loyal listeners. So please keep sending your case suggestions. Someone also suggested Afroman, but I had already started researching that one when that case suggestion came in because I knew it was going to be a good one. So please share this episode with a friend. Do the like, do the follow, do the subscribe. That would be great. The 3 Ono Media podcasts are Murder with My Husband, Into the Dark, and Rise in Crime. And as a sneak peek for anybody that's in the Utah area, we're within weeks of Ono Bagels opening in Utah. You guys need to be following this. This is Garrett's passion project. It's going to be so fun. I'm super excited. We're probably within 4 weeks, you guys. It's so close. So if you're near that area, make sure you're following Ono Bagels also and commenting and liking and subscribing, all the great things. All right, you guys, join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.